9:30 on MAGFest Sunday, and you made it. Congratulations, everyone. You've made it to 9:30 a.m., dawn of the final day. This is my 5th consecutive MAGFest doing a 9:30 a.m. panel on Sunday. Yeah, hey, I'm not the scheduling gods. Yeah, and so I do want to say that I really appreciate, just before we dive in, I really appreciate that all of you are up and at 'em for this kind of a panel. It's not, well, I don't think it's going to be a dense topic, but it is not, it's not like, hey, let's rate the best video game music from the past decade, you know what I mean? And so it's going to be fun. It's going to be
a really good question.
Yeah, that's a great question for another panel. Today we're rating the video game music for the last decade. Audible. So what I want you to do is, as you're out there listening to what we're talking about, if you have any questions or if you have any specific points or mainly questions, please write them down, because we're all early in the morning. We've all been at MAGFest for at least an hour, many of us more than that. And I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask that question and not forget it. So make sure you are writing things down.
Do we want to do concentrated Q&A at the end, but allow relevant questions throughout?
Concentrated at the end. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically talk until there's nothing else to talk about. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A of at least 15, but probably 20 or so minutes. Because there's a lot of questions that, honestly, the community has and had writing from this. So who's ready for a panel? Yeah, keep that energy going, guys. You got 3 lawyers up here, so... all right, so, yeah, listen, it's an all-the-time suit. It's a uniform. My wife said I looked very dashing in it. Oh, God. Oh, no. So welcome to Learn From Their Mistakes, Unity, and Wizards of the Coast. If you are here for that panel, you're in the right place. If you're not, honestly, kick your feet up. It's fine. Like I said, Sunday at MAGFest. Enjoy. My name's Noah Downs. I'm going to moderate today. We also have the amazing Ben and Leo. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We'll go down this way. Leo, tell them who you are, what you do, and your favorite Pokemon is much better than what I was going to say.
Can you hear me? Does this work?
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, my name is Leo. I've been working with Premac Rogers as an attorney for around a year now. I do a lot of trademark work. I do a lot of contract review. And my favorite Pokemon is probably Bulbasaur.
Great choice, and also exactly what I thought you were going to say.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. So I am Ben Premac of Premac Rogers. Actually, very, very shortly, Premac Rogers Downs. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
And I have been representing creatives mostly in the interactive electronic space, so video games, since the early 2010s. And then over the last 5 or 6 years have really expanded my practice, especially since I met Noah, to representing tabletop and pen and paper creators as well. And it's been a lot of fun. So, and then let's see, my favorite Pokemon is, do you guys want to guess, or do you want me to just go for it?
You're a Charmander guy. Nope. Oh my God. Usually first gen. Oh no? Okay, I'm wrong.
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, Honedge.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, specifically shiny Honedge.
Yeah, that's dope. My name's Noah Downs, a.k.a. my lawyer friend. I am on the internet, on Twitch, TikTok, and Twitter like that. I'm a Twitch partner as well, but for the purposes of this panel, I also am a professional GM, and I've been at Premac Rogers for 2.5 years? Long time. And I've been an attorney for 8. Specifically,
over 3.
Over 3. Jiminy Christmas, time flies. Oh, that's awesome. And so I've been working in the tabletop and gaming spaces for a long time as an attorney. I also represent content creators and developers on the video game side of things too. And I run my own tables and run my own podcast for this. So when we started to really dive into the OGL side of things, and then Unity followed suit, I was like, man, this year, 2023, what is it up with people? So before we dive into that, because that's like the next thing I'm going to say. My favorite Pokemon. Do you guys want to guess?
I mean, I always associate you with Snorlax, but that's because I'm an asshole.
It is Snorlax.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's Snorlax because it was my dad's favorite Pokemon. And originally, I was, Pikachu, like every person on the planet. And then my dad said, I like Snorlax. I'm like, you know what? That's a good answer. And I love you, Dad. So.
Well, if your dad was Snorlax, shouldn't you be Munchlax?
Oh, no, that's a much better answer. I like Munchlax, guys. So.
You've been doing it wrong for years. No?
I've been wrong for years. That's what this panel is about. So we're here to talk about the OGL and Unity. And so what we're going to talk about a little bit is like the base part of that. We're going to talk about what we can learn from the mistakes of Unity and Wizards of the Coast. And then we're going to ask a few more hard-hitting questions from Ben as well about what the community could have potentially done better as well. So first of all, who here is here because you heard about what happened with Wizards of the Coast and OGL? Awesome. Nice. Oh, me too. Yeah. Who here is here because you heard about what happened with Unity and Unity? Oh, my God. Okay. A lot of overlap there. How many of you are game developers on the video game side? Dope. Dope. Okay. How many of you are tabletop enthusiasts and or designers? Okay, cool. Great. Oh, cool. You guys are really neat. All right. So last year at MAGFest, we found out that Wizards of the Coast, or the general public at large, I guess I'll say, found out that Wizards of the Coast was going to update an over 20-year license called the Open Gaming License, version 1.0a. We found out because of some amazing sleuthing and reporting and a leak or two, allegedly, that this was going to happen and that it potentially was going to upend the entire licensing scheme that Wizards of the Coast had in place for 20 years. Now, you all are fans of D&D, right? Like, show of hands, D&D, love it? Okay, cool. Me too. I love D&D. I'm wearing a D&D Chaotic Neutral shirt. Like, we love D&D. It's a game that the community has embraced. It had a renaissance. It is a place to openly express yourself and build new worlds with your friends. It's incredible. However, Wizards of the Coast owns it. Flat out. That's their thing. And so what they had done about 20 years ago, kind of getting to the nuts and bolts of it, is they had published something called the OGL, or Open Gaming License. The Open Gaming License was revolutionary in its time. It was one of the first licenses published by a private company that allowed third-party content creators to really just play in the sandbox too. And part of the reason that it was so revolutionary was because it built the community of D&D into what it is today. The Open Gaming License is responsible, not single-handedly, but it's a huge part of it, for the reason that we have so much homebrew and third-party content. So, how many of you consume D&D content from sources other than Wizards of the Coast? Phenomenal. For example, like Griffin Saddlebag, DM Dave, all of those kinds of sources, Loot Tavern. These are all sources of third-party publishers who work and create in the D&D space using rules that are compatible with 5e. And they were allowed to exist because of the Open Gaming License. Normally, under normal circumstances, Wizards of the Coast could have shut them down and said, hey, thanks so much for writing this supplement, releasing it to the world, and collecting profits. Those are ours now. Peace. And allowing the Open Gaming License to exist has allowed the community to thrive and build. Before I just keep monologuing.
Well, it was also a really, really smart thing from a legal perspective for WotC to do back at that point in time. Because when you own a trademark, unless you police it, then you risk dilution. You actually risk losing the ability to control and maintain that intellectual property. And so by going out and affirmatively creating a license where we're saying, hey, we are giving this right within these constraints to the community to play in our sandbox, to use our tools, to use what we create, it meant that we, as players, and all the people who came in and were creating using it, especially doing commercial ventures, were doing so with WotC's permission,
right,
rather than doing so in an adverse sort of way. And so, I think that's one of the reasons why it caught us all so flat-footed 20 years later when they did what they did.
Yeah, because what had happened is WotC had used the OGL to build a community. Think about it this way. Wizards of the Coast did not have to hire a bunch of editors, artists, and writers to put out 20 supplements and books a year. They'd come down, and they still come down, to 5 or 6 publications a year. And we love those. They're core rule books. They're expansions on existing lore. They're great. Sometimes they accidentally include AI art in them. That sucks. They shouldn't do that. Sometimes they include overtly racist elements. That really sucks, and hopefully they're fixing that. But for the most part, they're awesome, and they're things that expand on this game that we have. But then we go out to these third-party creators, and we download their adventures, and it allows other people to play in those sandboxes and build in the world in a way that WotC can focus on creating D&D as opposed to creating games for D&D.
So how did OGL 1.1 then yank the rug out from that?
Yeah, so when OGL 1.1 was purported to come out, and I'm going to refer back to the article that I posted a year and 10 days ago because I want to nail this for you guys. So OGL 1.1 basically came out and said, hey, we're not going to do open licensing anymore. We're just going to do licensing. This is going to be subject to a royalty. It's going to be subject to our ability to use the work that you make under this license, and you're going to have to get stuff approved and do a lot of reporting requirements. Namely, it said, hey, if you collect revenue, gross revenue. By the way, who here knows what the definition of gross revenue is? All right, cool. Let me explain what that is. If I buy something for $10, like a chocolate bar, that is $10 of gross revenue. Now, if I take the money that or if the retailer takes the money that they've earned from that $10 sale and has to distribute it to the person who made the chocolate bar and paying their employees, those people are each getting net revenue, which is subparts of gross revenue. So effectively, it's like, hey, I get $2 from every sale of this chocolate bar. That $2 is net revenue, whereas the entire amount is gross revenue. So it's really important when you're looking at profit margins, because your net is typically your margin of profit, whereas your gross is your costs. So it cost me $8 to make this chocolate bar. My margin is $2 on a $10 sale. Here's what Wizards of the Coast proposed was anyone who makes more than $50K a year using the license off of their content has to report it. They don't have to pay a royalty yet, but they have to report it. Then they said anyone who makes more than $750,000 a year off of their content that is published by Wizards, especially the SRD, the base rule sets, they have to pay a 25% royalty. And now you might all be thinking, hey, Noah, $750,000 is a lot of money. Actually, $50K is a lot of money, right? But it's not, because we're in the world of multi-million-dollar Kickstarters from indie creators. So, for example, we had Ryoko's just ran $3 million on Kickstarters. Cricket Moon ran $4 million. All these Kickstarters are hitting multi-million-dollar marks, but their margins aren't multi-million-dollars. It might take $2 million of the $2.5 million to deliver that product. And so if you take a 25% margin on that, then that creator's losing money to bring that content to you. The math doesn't math. So that was one of the first main concerns. And then
it's already really, really hard to make a Kickstarter profitable just in the first place.
It is incredibly difficult. The second part of all this was that the Wizards of the Coast would have gotten a perpetual license to the content, meaning Wizards could have reused the content that you make as a third-party creator under this license, whether or not you're paying, whether or not you're subject to the royalty, whether or not you make any money on it. If you create in this sandbox, Wizards can say, oh, that's a great idea. We're going to use that and give you no credit. Hey, let's put that in the D&D movie or something like that. They have that right because you're getting them a license, a perpetual, irrevocable license to your content, meaning you basically no longer own it. And they don't have to tell anybody that you created it. And so that was another key issue that we had here. Is there anything that I'm missing so far from any of that?
From the OGL, I don't think so.
Yeah, okay, cool. And so obviously that's bad, right? Like, that's not great. That stifles creativity. It makes people not be able to work in the space. It puts a damper on the entire industry. That's their first mistake, is not realizing that this industry grew up because of the openness of that license. Okay, cool. So who remembers what Wizard of the Coast did next? How many of you really followed this? Cool, great. So you'll remember that Wizards of the Coast said, okay, actually, that was a draft, guys. That wasn't real. That's not out. That's not real. We didn't mean that. Kidding. Let's roll that back. So they rolled back and published something else, and it was the OGL 1.1 version or 1.2 version, which was slightly better, but it still included irrevocable licenses to your content. And that is still unacceptable because as an artist, as a creator of any sort, you should retain some sort of right of at least attribution to your content. So Wizards was in a pickle. Everybody was canceling their D&D subscription, D&D Beyond subscriptions. Who remembers hashtag D&D Be Gone? Yeah, that literally came out of a small Discord that I was in. That was flippin' wild. 40,000 people canceled their D&D Beyond subscriptions.
Do you guys remember how far Hasbro stock dropped?
How far, Ben?
What, 7%?
7%.
Yeah.
Hasbro as a whole, Hasbro being the parent company of Wizards of the Coast. D&D, Wizards of the Coast quickly realized, oh crap, we messed up. And instead of letting the people at Hasbro call the shots, they decided to actually let the people who lived and breathed this community for years and their employees working at Wizards to call the shots, which is a big step. Think about it this way. People that look at spreadsheets all day made this decision because they figured they could find a little bit more profit at the expense of the community. They effectively forcibly outsourced their revenue without expending any additional funds themselves. It's 9:30 in the morning on a Sunday. I'm just going to tell you, that was real fucked. And so the community got in uproar. People started going to other systems. Pathfinder sold out nationwide, which was wild. I was talking to Paizo at one point during this because we were working on the Orc license with them. And they're like, yeah, we honestly just can't keep shipments in. It's a mess. We're 6 months backlogged. And so it led to a boom in other systems, which meant that other people did leave D&D. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah, well, I suppose that leads into a question that I would love to ask the
actually,
crowd.
we'll talk about it now.
Yeah. So, certainly a lot of people picked up a number of different systems, and obviously people were very, very angry at WotC for doing this.
How many of you out here were pissed off at Wizards of the Coast last year? Cool. Also, they laid off a bunch of people, and that's another mistake too. So.
Yeah. But how many of you think that you would still be angry? How many of you think that you wouldn't have gone back to D&D at some point? Fair. Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. So, 40 people in the audience, 3 people have affirmatively said definitely no.
Yeah.
So,
here's what I think
the community has a short memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, we won't bring them out of business at all.
Yeah.
It would certainly have impacted their bottom line in the short term.
Yeah.
It definitely did impact their bottom line. They handled it terribly from a community management and a community communication perspective. They'd been open. They had been giving us a sandbox to play in for years, and then all of a sudden said, this is ours.
Yeah.
But next generation probably would have forgotten.
Yeah.
And moved on. And then those bean counters would have been really happy because they would have been getting free content.
The internet has a short memory. And if we had lit up on this, if this community, and when I say we, I don't mean the 3 people up here. I mean the 40 people out there. That's y'all. If we had lit up, then Wizards wouldn't have eventually tossed this into the Creative Commons without proofreading their work, apparently, because now Strahd is in the Creative Commons, which is wild. But also, we wouldn't have been able to, quote-unquote, save the OGL. A lot of people at the end of this said, hey, we saved D&D. D&D is here because of us. They rolled it back. We stood up to the big man. Well, we fought the law, and the law lost. That's what I'm going for there. And that's true. But I also think to a certain extent that the community might have been harmed, not just as a result of Wizards' actions and as a result of the response that we had to have to it to protect our hobby. I think it irreparably damaged the hobby to a certain extent. What do you think about that, Ben?
I mean, I'm going to disagree about anything being irreparable, but
okay.
But certainly harmed the hobby.
Set it back, at least.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Hands down.
Which is another mistake by D&D, is that they didn't think about the consequences of their actions. Uh-oh, it's the consequences of my actions. So we've talked about two mistakes here. One is doing this at all. Two is not thinking about the potential consequences. Three is the lack of utter lack of open communication on behalf of Wizards of the Coast, which is going to be a theme here. You game designers, developers out there, if we can stress nothing else, if you take nothing else away from this panel, what we want to tell you is to make sure that you have open and honest communication with your community. Wizards of the Coast and Unity, as we're about to talk about, utterly fucked that up. And it caused all of this harm and all these mistakes that we're having. If Wizards had gone to a few folks, and as they were actually considering doing and saying, hey, here's a draft for real this time of the proposed OGL 1.1. Can we get some feedback on it? How would this affect you guys? Because you were part of the community. You're part of our success. Then they probably would have been met with a lot less resistance and maybe a better opening document. But they didn't do that. They handed it down by fiat because they believed that they owned it instead of the community owning it. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, and it's a model that we've all gotten used to over the last 30 years. Mm-hmm. You know, think how often you get an email from Facebook or some other, online service that you subscribe to that just says we've updated our terms of use. And
how many of you just clicked that?
Yeah.
I'm a lawyer and I just clicked that.
What about saying we've updated our privacy policies? Fair enough. And so, they were operating in a model that we'd all gotten used to. It just so happened that their mistake was particularly egregious, and we had a lot of people watching what they were doing, and who would have been deeply impacted by it. And we're willing to use their positions within the community to fight against it.
Yeah.
So, in some ways, we also got lucky.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what happened with Unity, too, and then we'll tie this all together with a nice little bow at the end and offer up questions. So who wants to talk about what happened over on the Unity spectrum towards the end of the year?
I'll go ahead.
Sure.
So how many here are video game developers?
Yeah.
So yeah, for those of you who are not familiar with what Unity is an engine which is pretty much software that you use to make games.
Hit that mic a little bit more.
Unity is pretty much software that you use to make games, and basing what I'm going to say on an article that Ben wrote about this issue, it has two components. One of the components is the Unity runtime, which is the code that allows the game to be executed on devices, and the Unity engine, which is pretty much the workbench where you create the game. So what Unity tried to do few months ago was to implement a runtime fee. And a runtime fee, what that means is that every time you use the runtime, like you execute the game on a device, you would have to pay them based on that amount of times that the runtime was executed. So if you installed the game, if you had 100,000 installs, you would have to pay them a certain royalty. If you had 1 million installs, you would have to pay them a higher royalty. The problem with that was that a lot of things counted as installs that are not really installs. Like if you were troubleshooting the game and you had to uninstall and reinstall and uninstall and reinstall, that was 4 installs that you had. Or if you provided a demo, that was another install that you had. And a lot of developers, like the point of Unity at the beginning was to kind of make it more accessible for developers to make their games on their own. And if you start doing that, then the developers are gonna start getting fucked on the royalties because they don't have that money to pay them, because you need the game to sell first in order to be able to pay to the people that provide you the software with which you use which you make the games. So the backlash here was that the developer community, a lot of them would be held back by those royalties, and a lot of them would have unexpected costs that they didn't take into account when they started developing the game. The other problem was that a lot of games were already deep into development, and you can't, as a protest, you can't just go like, well, I'm not going to use Unity anymore, because you can't just build your game from scratch. Yeah. So now you're kind of stuck with Unity, and you have to accept those terms. And, you know, big companies can do that, but what are you going to do if you're a solo developer that you started your game while COVID was going on, and you have pretty much a demo, and what are you supposed to do? You wasted 2 years of your life working on this, and now they're asking you for money that you don't even have yet.
Yeah, it effectively wiped out indie development as a viable thing on Unity. It made it sounds very familiar to the OGL fiasco, huh? Which we were sitting there like, holy crap, this is literally the same thing.
They were looking for money.
They were looking for more money, and they found a button they could push to make more money. Now, if everyone in this audience was handed a button that would allow them to print money, we'd all press that button, right? Okay, but it's the classic, hey, if you press this button, you'll get $1 million, but like this person, a random person you don't know will die. Except that in this case, we know who those people are, and they're our community. And it was brutal. Effectively, it ruined any chance at marketing games, going to cons, doing demos, unless you worked with a major publisher that could basically subsidize your costs. Indie publishing, as we know it, would have been dead. And a lot of projects that we loved and would have wanted to see come to fruition, things that you had been announced and had release dates, would have been dead in the water because they would have been viable anymore.
Yeah, and that was also one of the problems. They didn't build in any sort of transition period, any exemptions for pre-existing products. They didn't work with the community to soften the blow. They just made this blanket rule that applied to everyone.
Mm-hmm. So that was a mistake. It was a mistake that could have also been solved with communication. When it comes down to this, all of these mistakes can be solved with communication and understanding your audience. The problem is when you get to a certain size, even if you're founded on the indie development, even if you're founded on a bunch of people around the table in your basement writing for adventures, if you're creating video games with your best buddies during COVID, something like that, if you found a company and you lose touch with your community, the community that brought you there, that you profess to love and cherish, and the one that gives you millions of dollars a year, then you're going to have a bad time. So I guess one of the big mistakes that we can take away is they didn't communicate, and they assumed that they could just screw their community and people were going to roll over. What do you guys think was another mistake? I just took the biggest one, so I'm sorry.
Well, I'm also really, really proud of this community that we caught the mistake and twice in a year and had the stamina to go up for that fight, and that a lot of people whose livelihoods were dependent upon D&D and on Unity were willing to go in and say, we're not going to take this. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's a huge reminder, and it made me very proud of the community, and it also reminded me just how important it is to always be keeping an eye out on the things that you're relying upon. Yeah. And to be aware, to be vigilant, and to not allow people to come in and make changes that are harmful. So.
Yeah, and I think another good thing to point out is that when we say community, it's not just the developers and the creators. Like us as consumers and people that enjoy the work that creators do, it's kind of our responsibility to know what's going on and voice our opinion, because that's, it's this kind of things is the machine we all have to rage against. So if we don't help our creators, we're not gonna get the content that we want or the content that we love so much.
I love the line, "This is a machine that we're going to have to rage against, Leo." I need that on a shirt, please. Somebody should make a band with that name. I also want to kind of point out and piggyback on what Leo was saying there, is that this community learned invaluable lessons. And like I said earlier, when I say community, I mean every single one of you in this room learned a valuable lesson of trust but verify. You're going to have to start somewhere. As attorneys, we say, hey, make sure you have the ability to play in the sandbox and you're not trespassing in someone else's sandbox, because then they can kick you out and make you leave all your toys. And that would suck. And all your money. That's another thing. They'll take your wallet too. But trust but verify. If you are dependent on a service, if you make it the backbone of your entire business, of your game, of your of anything that you're working on, make sure that you follow along with any and all developments. You got to be vigilant. Even as a hobbyist, you got to be vigilant, because you don't want to find yourself coming down the wrong path there. Now, I will also just really quick say, it's a product of capitalism, guys, which sucks. I hate capitalism, but I'm good at it. And I would say that this is something that is only going to get worse before it gets better, I think. So you're going to have to pay a lot more attention going forward.
And I think it's also this is a good opportunity to talk about what you can do to protect yourselves.
Yeah.
You know, the sort of words that you should be looking out for, things like revocable, are, you know, you want, if you are involved in a transaction, whether that is a transaction directly with a company like WotC, or you're taking advantage of terms that they have put out, you want to see that those terms are irrevocable. If they say that they're revocable or terminable, then that means that those terms can be changed at any point in time. Yeah. And there's probably nothing that you can do about it. Other things that you could do to protect yourself, you know, one thing that we spun up very, very quickly after the D&D fiasco was a number of larger creators came in and we started helping them to negotiate bilateral licenses, bilateral contracts directly with WotC to establish, because the OGL was an open license. So therefore, who's going to enforce it? If you have a bilateral contract where it's a contract between two parties, then that's a binding contract, and it gives the opportunity for, if one party decides that they don't want to meet its terms anymore, the other party gets to come in and enforce it. And so, you know, keeping an eye on those terms, being ready to get up to bat, watching out for red flags, and also sometimes every once in a while looking at it and going, maybe it's time to hire a lawyer and go in and negotiate a direct license with someone rather than relying on what they've put out to the community. So what else can they do to protect themselves? Yeah.
No, yeah, and besides the license that they're giving you, also you have to know what you're giving them. Because like with OGL, what you were giving them was pretty much, do whatever you want with my content, don't give me credit, don't pay me. And it's just as important to have, to control your creation. Because if you just let people use it willy-nilly, what are you going to get out of it? Like, you can't live off it. So it's just going to be a hobby for you.
Yeah. That's a really important point to remember, is that as artists, as creators, your work is valuable, and we all fight imposter syndrome. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of these corporations count on, is they're like, hey, I'm going to give you this opportunity. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. I'm sick of opportunities of a lifetime. I'd like some opportunities to get paid. And so, obviously, I do think that there are occasions where you can work for free for certain opportunities, or as long as you are getting something out of it and it's something you're passionate about. That said, if you're not getting something out of it, never give up your work for free. I think.
What are some keywords that people should be watching out for?
Yeah, so some keywords that people should be watching out for in your contracts. And obviously, this is where I pause and say, this is not legal advice. This is legal information. I'm not your lawyer unless I'm literally your lawyer. Hi, guys. And that we are available for hire. What else? Oh, yeah, don't take this legal advice and try it at home. Go to a friend's house. So, good?
Yeah.
Cool. So
You remembered to do it. I didn't.
this is my 11th panel. I got to remember to do it. Some of the words that people should look out for, like Ben said, terminable, revocable versus irrevocable. You should look at whether or not your content is going to be licensed, whether it's sub-licensable to third parties. Do you lose control of your content? What that means is, can the person you give your content to then give it to other people without your permission? Are you going to get credit for your work? Do you have control over that credit? Can the license terms be amended without your consent? Or can they be amended only with the written consent of both parties? What are the notification procedures? Are you going to hear if they update the license, or can they just one day update the terms of service on their website? And one thing I will stress to you all is that for every OGL situation and every Unity situation, there are 10 more that you're not hearing about because people aren't paying attention. I think there's been a few news articles about it, but for the large part, this whole, hey, you have to have a subscription to have like a radio in your car now thing has gone largely unattacked. Because we're just like, oh, I got to have a car, I guess, and BMW. So I don't have a BMW, by the way, but I have a Ford Maverick. But I would say that look out for how people can change the license without your consent. Because here's the thing, consent is key. You have to consent when it comes to the use of your work. You have to have a say, and that is the most important right you have. If you're giving your work for free, if you're working for a nonprofit or something like that, you're still consenting. So make sure that you're doing that. And also, by the way, I do encourage everyone to work with nonprofits, and just to make sure out there. That is a great example of when you can work for free. But if it's Wizards of the Coast, you get your ass paid.
No. They're making plenty of money.
Yeah.
What are some other terms? Let's see. So if you're reading through a document and you see that it says that it's fully paid up or royalty free.
Yeah, well, they don't have to pay for it ever again. Like it's like, we paid you nothing for this, and this is what we're gonna pay you for it, and you're accepting it. Another thing I think we should keep an eye out on is like technology is always evolving, so you gotta take that into account when you release a product that is dependent on like a platform, for example, because you release it now for Switch, but in 5 years there's gonna be a new console.
Yeah.
Does the contract say that it's gonna be that they're gonna have the rights for those consoles too? And the same with, like, let's say books. 20, 30 years ago there weren't ebooks, so are they gonna have the rights to keep doing it, or do I have the ability to just renegotiate how we're gonna deal with the electronic version of what I used to do as a print version?
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially the reason why we had the writer's strike this year.
Yeah.
Shall we go dive right into Q&A?
Oh, I will say one more thing, and Ben's not going to like that I'm saying this, but maybe he will. Actually, I think you will. The writer's strike that Ben just made a good point about. Hey, unions are dope. They really help workers' rights. So if anybody tells you otherwise, they're selling something.
One other term that I just wanted everyone to watch out for is exclusive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because if it says exclusive, you really need to then dive into what they're saying is exclusive, because that can have a lot of different meanings in the contract based upon the words that follow it. Yeah. If they're looking for an exclusive license, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you do want to make sure that you understand how long that exclusive license is for, and you also want to make sure that you as the creator have the right to revoke that license, and depending on the terms and depending on the deal that you're getting, you might also be giving up the right to use that work yourself.
Yeah.
So you're giving it to them, they get to exploit it, they get the exclusive right to use it, even exclusive to you.
To kind of put that into a practical example, for example, if you're an amazing fantasy artist, for example, like the one we have here in the front row, hi, Kat, and you create a beautiful Kinku Bard, and it's a beautiful illustration, you grant Wizards of the Coast an exclusive right to use that image, you can't sell that yourself at MAGFest. Means that you better get paid a lot of money, because Kinku bards are dope too. So
just be aware of it. You know,
Yeah.
none of these terms are necessarily bad in and of themselves, but what they are is flags.
Right.
For for you to stop, read, make sure you understand what you're seeing, and then know what you're getting into. So
talk to a lawyer.
yeah, shall we go ahead and move to Q&A then?
Yeah, do we have a floating mic that we can?
have one here. Let's see if it works.
What we're going to do is, if you have a question, line up in the middle. If you are unable to line up for whatever reason, we will make sure that microphone gets to you. As a quick reminder, if you are asking, we are lawyers. Like we said, we're not your lawyers. If you have a specific question that looks like, hey, go ahead and grab that for me, bud. And you have a question and you say, hey, this is the situation that I'm facing. Give me legal advice. We're going to say, no, talk to us later.
What we do offer is free consultations.
Yep.
You know, we want to help people with problems. There's a reason why we do what we do. And so we would be happy to sit down and have a private and confidential conversation with you about your issues.
Yep.
Where we determine whether or not it's something we can help you with, and go from there.
Sounds good. Go for it, bud.
So, hello. Is this okay.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm not good with mics. You mentioned that you worked on the ORC license with Paizo. Can you go into a bit more detail about what exactly that entailed or what you worked on it? Being a big Pathfinder fan myself, I've always been curious about the actual legal side of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we are not Paizo's counsel. We were brought in to consult with it with their primary counsel. Azora Law is their primary counsel, and they're phenomenal too. And so Azora reached out to us because we had put out a lot of publications about the OGL, and we're very involved in disseminating information about it. And they came and said, hey, we're going to put out the ORC. Can you read through it and make sure that you're not going to write an article about us too? And and I said, sure thing. And Ben and I hopped on a bunch of calls with them and slowly worked through the license to make sure that it was something that would be palatable for everyone. Because even when we're doing legal drafting, words can mean two things, which is why we have jobs. And so we wanted to make sure there was no pitfalls in that license. I think the ORC is a phenomenal license. I recommend people use it. I think that Azora did an amazing job, especially Brian over there, incredible attorney. I do recommend that people use it. Now, fortunately, it's both fortunately and unfortunately, it's not getting as much use as we anticipated it would because Wizards rolled back so much. But it's still out there, it's still available, and I would definitely encourage people to use it.
That was a better answer than the one that I was going to give, because after we did all that, then I went and had dinner with Brian, and we chatted about the ORC license for a while.
Let's say,
anyway.
Don't save that stuff.
So this is a Unity question, and how did you feel about the merger a few years ago with Iron Source and the privacy issues brought up by putting all the ad company stuff into Unity, and the recent shakeup like a few weeks ago where they kind of started to walk away from that?
Oh man, I don't really remember the details of that all that much. So
let's put it this way: when we prepped for this panel, we didn't think anyone was going to ask about it.
Okay.
you know,
it was just basically
It's a great
spyware
question.
adjacent.
broadly speaking, on privacy issues,
Yeah.
It's been really great to see how much more legislation there's being in the United States, abroad, that there's being some focus on getting national legislation, even though there isn't any yet. But at least it's, people are recognizing it's an issue. And we're stopping, it's getting to the point now where we're not letting people get away with crap as much.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to see.
Yeah. Just go off of that too. Obviously Unity's a corporation, they're a company. And so giving them your private data, if you're going to do it, you need to get that juice, got to be worth the squeeze. And so with running ads and doing customizations and stuff like that, you always want to make sure that you understand how your data is being used, because companies get hacked and get leaks all the time. I'm confident that somebody's probably like in here just listening, being like, the whole time. But that is all to say that. No, don't do that.
How many phones?
She's listening.
Yeah.
Oh no, now my light's on. But that is all to say that every company is going to use every single thing that you give them because companies are companies and they don't care about you. They don't care about you as an employee. They don't care about you as a consumer. They care about what's in your wallet and what you can do for them because that is their job. They are there to make profits. So anytime you interact with a company, unfortunately, we're in a situation where you effectively have to have a legal degree to understand the full scope of what you're giving them. So, yes, we love these indie darlings and we love these companies. And, you know, I'm a Twitch partner, Bleed Purple, but we're starting to see the capitalist hellscape that they've created. Of course.
Hello.
Hey, Kat.
Hi, Noah. And crew.
Yeah.
I have a two-part question, if you will allow me. Or I guess two mini questions.
Yeah.
One's a mini question, the other one's a question.
Mm-hmm.
The mini question, which could be common knowledge, I could probably back research it and stuff, but do we know, like, public knowledge about how much, like, obviously Daddy Hasbro and, like, the whole, like, owning Wizards of the Coast and making decisions for them, and there's been a lot of kind of controversy about decisions that have been made at the top that have affected the whole, you know, department, but how much Hasbro was it versus, like, Wizards, or are they not making a distinction at all?
Do you mind if I?
Go ham, fam.
We know a lot about this. Unfortunately, it's not public, and we can't talk about it.
There are certain things that are public.
Okay, what do you know that's public?
All right.
Pretty much everything that I know is private.
Everybody, let's do some context clues. You ready? I'm going to paint a picture, and then y'all are going to go, "It's Always Sunny," and just go like, okay? So, early December of last year, December 8th, I believe it was, 2 years ago, December 8th, 2022, Hasbro has a shareholders meeting where they say, hey, this Wizards of the Coast thing is blowing up. People love D&D. People really like that Stranger Things show, and those kids talk a lot of D&D. Mm-hmm. So D&D's exploding. We can make more money. And then suddenly we have OGL 1.0 going away. And then, okay, let me make sure that's open. Yes, it is. Okay.
It was definitely profit driven.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. And it is definitely public that it was Hasbro giving a directive to WotC to make it happen.
Yeah, and if you look at the scope of the messaging, you can see when messaging changes because people are getting their messaging either not from external sources anymore, but from internal sources. And people that understand the community. So, and you said you had another question too?
Yes, this one's for Unity, or Unity related. There's a lot of fear in the, like, just game dev communities in general, about, obviously, like, well, Unity is just gonna strong arm this through, and then it's gonna set a precedent, and every company is gonna follow suit. You know, Unreal and other programs will just. How much of that have you all seen, I guess? Like, is there a movement towards that? Have we really fought it back? What are you seeing happen?
This actually kind of ties into your question earlier, and what Noah was just saying about, you know, shareholder profits. So if you look at Unity next to Unreal and Epic, they are fundamentally different companies. And the basic difference is that Unity is a publicly traded company, and Epic is not, which means that Epic can choose to do things that aren't profit-driven, such as wasting tons of money going toe-to-toe with Apple to try to prove that they're right, which is great. You can also, you know, see them, they just piss money away. It's what they do. And that's perfectly okay because they don't have the same duties, they don't have the same obligations to turn a profit, and then they don't also have the same pressure from the outside markets to keep their revenue levels, their profit levels high in order to keep their stock price high. So to come back to your question of whether we're seeing this elsewhere, we are. And there's also been a huge amount of backlash in the community where a number of other engines are getting a lot more attention than they used to. Linux-based engines, names are escaping me at the moment.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
Yep.
Godot.
yeah, there are a number of other ones.
Mm.
Yeah. And you always have to be careful with any sort of open source license, just like we've been talking about.
Well, the open gaming license was an open source license.
But the video game development community as a whole came in and went, this isn't okay.
Yep.
And started creating tools to get around it. And in many ways, pardon me, in many ways, Unity is not as crucial to video game development as D&D is to the tabletop community.
Yeah.
And Unity thought that they were, and learned that they aren't.
Yeah. And go ahead, Julia.
I've also seen a few indie devs who have had like successful games. Like I think the devs for Slay the Spire were ones that they just publicly said like we're changing to another engine. We're not using Unity anymore, and that's a good thing because it's like small, like relatively small devs that can afford to do that, and it shows that even the small people can give backlash to the big companies, and it motivates other developers, so when they're actually successful, they can take measures like that too. It doesn't just have to be like Epic that shows people that we can stand against this type of issues.
Yeah. Hey, other cat.
Hello. So my question is possibly a bit more music industry related, but it still affects the video game industry. So similarly, Spotify recently changed their royalty structure that you don't get paid until each song hits 1,000 streams that year. The money for those streams, for those of you who don't know, otherwise get distributed among the major label artists who very much don't need that revenue. And so for composers and smaller video game soundtracks, independent artists, I haven't seen really a movement of fighting back against that, unfortunately. Any suggestions on how we can fight back?
Yes. Contact everyone you know at A2IM, including public people.
A2IM?
A2IM is the American Association of Independent Music.
Okay.
And it is the Indie Artists Association in music. We have actually worked closely with them on several things. And they actually have an upcoming conference called Indie Week. It's in a few months. And this needs to be screamed from the rooftops. I'm actually surprised more people haven't been asking this question this weekend. For example, I canceled my Spotify subscription, Apple Music all the way, because they were paying artists more to begin with.
Yep.
But this is, I think there's going to, this is not legal advice. Mm-hmm. I think there's going to be lawsuits over this. Because this is directly just taking money out of someone's pocket with no other remuneration. It is messed up, and
it's also using their property. Spotify's still getting to play the music.
Yeah.
Without compensating the owner.
Most of the people out here will say that's theft. It is. There's a legal word for it. It's called conversion, and it is real fucked. So yeah, no, it's something that people should be talking about. And so here's the thing. Congress, I hate to say Congress, but Congress recently, passed the Music Modernization Act in 2018. So they don't give a shit about this stuff anymore. They are burnt out on music for at least 20 more years. So you've got to contact those independent associations, like A2IM specifically, and say, hey, what are you doing about this? And where's resources that we can talk about? What I think is kind of shocking is that our firm has a great relationship with A2IM. And this year we put out articles about Twitch's new monetized streamer agreements. We put out articles, which is Twitch partner agreements. We put out articles about Unity, and we put out articles about OGL. We have not heard from A2IM about this at all. And that's not to say they need to reach out to us, but they shared our other articles. So they know we write them. So A2IM is the source to reach out to. And actually I have people that you can reach out to there as well, just to kind of raise the voices and raise the black flags.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Hello. So first question, I think is straightforward. So you mentioned the ORC license or ORC license. Mm-hmm. That is ORC, right?
We call it ORC.
Okay.
To be clear, they wouldn't have called it, or it doesn't really fit if you just call it ORC. That's what they wanted you to do.
Gotcha. Yeah, so is that purely for tabletop, or can that also apply to digital games?
Great question. I believe I'm going to couch my response in a ton of things here.
It has been too long since I've read it.
Yeah, I believe that it can be used to convert things to digital, similarly to how OGL 1.0a allowed Knights of the Old Republic to lift the entire system of D&D. Go Star Wars. I believe that it allows you to go to digital. Here's what people aren't necessarily going to use it for that, though, because there are downstream effects. So the orc allows you to put things back into the public knowledge. It allows you to divest yourself of ownership of certain things that you put out into the world, and recontribute back to the general pool of knowledge and work. So a lot of video games probably aren't going to necessarily use it because it's more intricate on that front, because there's of the various moving pieces that go into making a video game.
Gotcha.
I can definitely say that digital wasn't part of the conversation, really. We were, when they were making Orc, it was really focused on supporting the tabletop industry and providing an alternative to D&D.
Ask a lawyer.
Thanks.
Besides us, or us later.
Yeah. If I could ask one more thing.
Sure.
I'm also wondering, so talking about this Unity thing and this Wizards of the Coast thing, did a lot of people come to you, or did you reach out to people you worked with when this came up and just immediately try to figure out what's going on, take action on that? Or was it more of
we were contacted. We have a lot of restrictions on whether or not we can reach out to people, because ambulance chasers are a thing, and so now we have a lot of restrictions on our outreach to potential clients. So what I will say to that is, I can't say too much about that, but yes, we did receive inbound requests relating to it. And I made a very, very, very last-minute 36-hour trip to PAX Unplugged last year. And I didn't see much of the floor. So that's what I'll tell you.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Hello.
Hey there. First off, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Also, one of the things we see when we see big bad trends in industry and politics is, in some small way, somewhere out there, there's a response. There's a couple of people trying to put something together as a response. And one thing that comes to mind is we've got a lot of great open source software out there that really compete with the big corporate offerings. Do you see any responses like that to the Unity situation? And if so, what advice you have for them?
Let me see if I can. I just want to make sure I'm grabbing your question here. So it's with the open source response, where people are creating open source content or tools in response to these actions by Unity and Wizards.
Yes.
Are we seeing those arise, and what advice would we give those open source tools?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we are, for sure. As Ben mentioned, there's a lot of open source engines that people are turning to. We have developers that are saying, you know what? Somebody made Unity. I'll make my own engine.
Yeah.
And those people are really cool. Good for them. Go for it. Absolutely. That's what we say. That's the advice. Go ham, fam, as I've said twice now on this panel. That's weird. Cool. But go nuts. It is, if the more that you make yourself, the more you own. The less you have to rely on others, the better off you are. And hey, if you make a game and a product, all of a sudden, you're epic.
That's true. That's true.
In 2 ways. Oh, that was good.
Yeah.
No, like, yeah, if you're a game developer, you have no reason to think about making something for someone else to make games. You just focus on your game. So yeah, just make your own engine.
Yep.
Nice. Nice. The last question. Any of y'all stream or make any content?
Yep.
Ah, nice.
So, thank you so much for asking.
Yeah.
I stream. I'm a Twitch partner. I only stream for charity, and so people do subscribe to me because I got dope emotes.
Nice.
But I stream usually on Tuesdays. It's been about a month just because of the holidays. So you can find me on Twitch at MyLawyerFriend. I'm also on Twitter at MyLawyerFriend.
Nice.
And also, I have the Forgotten Paths podcast.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so you can find the Forgotten Paths podcast on any podcatcher of choice. Okay. If you like Critical Role, if you like Dimension 20, we're not them. But but we're very, very, very fun, and we have an amazing, diverse group of folks. It was an amnesia campaign that we started with blank character sheets and did 60 episodes. So if you start listening to this campaign, there's an end. 60 episodes later, I promise you.
All right.
And we just announced Campaign 2 is coming out starting in June. So. And a bunch of miniseries, too. So, thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, y'all.
That's my audience plan. Last question, last but not least.
You guys mentioned that there wasn't quite as much orc adoption as you thought there might be. Is that compatible with the OGL, or are the two licenses not compatible with each other?
Yeah, I mean, as much as Pathfinder is compatible with D&D.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're creative people. We can sit down and we could make it work, but they're certainly not designed to play well together.
Yeah, they are not oil and water, but they're like what happens when you shake oil and water. Like, eventually it'll separate out, but we can make it work for a little bit.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming. Great question, bud. Woo. All right, I got one more panel later.